So welcome everybody to this panel discussion around the future of the workplace. I'd like to introduce the panel to you in a few moments, but just by sort of a quick introduction to why we're speaking to each other today and why we're addressing you and a few of the challenging questions that are all around us in this difficult time. We've just been through the world's largest ever home working experiment, which was an enormous test in terms of people and technology, not to mention the impact on mental health and well-being and previously taken for granted notions of collaboration between colleagues. It's a very strange time. The simple fact is that that work from home experiment has been a huge success. The technology stood up to the challenge, businesses continue to flow. It's been a really interesting 12-month period, and obviously we're not out of the woods yet. But the hybrid workplace as a term and as a notion and as a subject for debate and discussion has become a hot topic for many organizations. Certainly all of our clients are talking about pretty much nothing else these days. Questions like, will we return to the office full time? Will we remain at home? What about co-working, public spaces? How will this affect productivity and employee well-being? And what part will technology play? But rather than continue to read the opinions of others and offer our own opinions, which everybody would be heartily sick of by now, we asked individuals in the UK and the USA, particularly predominantly office workers, to tell us how they were feeling about the situation and what their thoughts are about how it might impact their future. So we commissioned YouGov to conduct a huge employee survey, as I say, just around 2,000 people, slightly over. All employees previously worked most or all of the time in an office, but during the pandemic, were all required to work from home. So some of the interesting takeaways from that survey, we found that younger people were more impacted than older people. And I guess it's possibly, certainly a lot of the people I've spoken to, due to the different circumstances that lots of young people find themselves in terms of living in shared accommodation in populous cities like London and New York. And I know a couple of our own guys had said to me what they'd found the hardest was kind of working and living in the same space, you know, while hearing all of the people they live with trying to do the same thing each day. It's tough. So I think it's going to be an interesting debate for us to kind of consider things of that nature. So today we're going to review some of the results and discuss the implications for organizations across the world, really. And I'm joined by an esteemed panel, delighted to say, all with vast experience in workplace management and workplace technology. So welcome to Colette Temminck, currently serves on the board of directors for IFMA, the International Facilities Management Association, and as Chief Strategy and Product Officer at Blue Sky, IBE. Prior to founding BSI, Colette was President of Property Services at Eden, Global Head of Integrated Facilities Management for Cushman & Wakefield, and Senior Vice President and Chief Administration Officer at Apollo Education Group. So welcome, Colette, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
We've also got Nellie Hyatt. Nellie is Head of Workplace Transformation for VergeSense. And prior to working at VergeSense, one of our really important partners, we've done some fantastic work with those guys. Nellie was co-founder of Workplace, the first hiring platform dedicated to the workplace and CRE industry. And Nellie has also led workplace strategy for Stripe and acted as a workplace consultant, helping many businesses rethink their workplace strategy. So welcome to you as well, Nellie, and thanks for coming on. Last but by no means least, and continuing the Cushman & Wakefield connection, a warm welcome to David Willett. David is a formally educated architect and still a registered architect these days. David is also Head of Digital Workplace Strategy at Cushman & Wakefield and previously served as Product Manager at Trimble in the Integrated Workplace Management Solutions space. Real Estate Technology Specialist at Gensler and Director of Solutions Architecture at Manhattan Software. So welcome to all of you.
Thank you, Gerry.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to some of the research and look at sort of the questions that we asked of our 2,000 people panel. And as I say, I'll ask each of you to kind of analyze some of the results of this and give us your thoughts. So the first was around the pressures of home life. And 50% of our US respondents and 39% of the UK respondents felt that home life pressures made it harder for them to be productive when working from home. So of this, we found that 30 to 44-year-olds were nearly 2 times more likely to be affected than those aged 55 plus. 18 to 24-year-olds were most affected, And interestingly, more men were affected than women. So 57% more men said they found it harder to work from home than women. So how do we help people work from home and still remain productive and happy? Nelly, would you like to give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Of course, some of those numbers are surprising, but we have to put them into context. Unfortunately, I haven't looked at the number in the UK, but in the US, we lost 1/3 of women in the workforce. So they will not be able to answer those surveys. And so this is why the proportion of men feeling more anxious is because they're still working. Unfortunately, many women had to make a choice and prioritize their family as they were homeschooling their kids because schools were closed. And so they just are completely removed from right now our universe of office workers or knowledge workers. And for those who are being able to say, and that includes young people, it's not a normal time, it's a pandemic time. So not only we had to juggle working and being at home, but also not being able to have a third place, which is being with your friends, socialize, going to restaurants, going to theater, having this place that are our go-to places to like just discharge after work. And so the way, like the very optimistic numbers that we have is from people who have been able to go back to the office and having, again, this balance of like, oh, I have a work life and I have another life where I dedicate myself to working for nonprofits, being with my friend, doing my hobbies, or just enjoying this time away from work to recharge, reconnect, and then be more productive at work.
Okay, thank you. Colette, David, any thoughts on that question, that topic?
Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, I think a common theme in a lot of the survey is that before the pandemic, we talked about work-life balance, right? But we didn't really delve into what that life aspect meant. And I think all of these survey results are a reflection of people's life, right? And what it means in relationship to work. So I think it's fascinating to see the breakdowns, and I'm really happy to see the breakdowns between the UK and the US to try and decouple what that means as well.
Yeah, I just want to touch upon the productivity piece. So if you think about the pressures of whether you're in an apartment with roommates, you're at home with children or without children, this all impacts productivity. And, enhancing productivity is also contingent upon knowledge and just improving job performance. And I think it was recently the CEO of JP Morgan Chase who said, most professionals learn through an apprenticeship, through work. And that type of learning can't be replicated in a Zoom environment. And that's going to be telling on how kind of the office and that learning journey happens for an employee, and that potential decrease in mentorship and just that knowledge transfer is going to have an impact on productivity, and in turn is going to be a challenge for the work-life balance, right? Are they going to go into the office? How many days are they going to go into the office? And think about that whole blend in their life.
No, I think that's a really good point, because we've actually always been a home-based business. So we have an office in London, but all of our employees are kind of set up to work from home. So, it's always been an ambition of mine to see how far we can push that. We're up to 60 people, all working and collaborating together every day. And what we do is we kind of post the amount of Teams conversations and video calls that we have. And I think it's something crazy, like 4,000 hours, every month that we spend collaborating with one another. And it's an interesting cultural challenge, that's for sure. We'll be interested to see how things pan out as more and more people work like that.
Yeah, okay. I think I would love to add something to what you just said, Gerry, is that it requires a lot of intentionality. And this is why I'm very optimistic about the future of work, because we didn't have as much intention going to the office. We thought collaboration was happening, socialization was happening, learning was happening just because people were in the same room. That was not true for everybody. And most companies were already globally distributed. So you always had a few reports that were not in the same office because they were in a different time zone. And so because we didn't have that intentionality of really creating a path to learn, to grow, to socialize through the digital workplace, then there was people who were already negatively impacted before COVID, of being remote, of being in a different time zone, of not being in the HQ, but being in satellite office. So really, I think that COVID really decoupled what are the different paths that an employee goes through during their time with a company, and how do we make it accessible wherever you are, and whether you go to an office or whether you only connect to the digital HQ. And I'm very happy about this.
I think it's also a question of trusting the people that you have in your team, right? And believing that the output is what matters, not the hours you spend sat staring at your camera. You know, we've heard these tales of people that are putting in software on their employees' computers to monitor when they're there. You know, wow, I can't even conceive of doing something like that. Okay, so let's move on to the next question, which is a really interesting topic based on the end of the last conversation, which is around virtual meeting effectiveness. So a large portion of our respondents found virtual meetings less productive than live meetings, which is very interesting. And again, younger people are more affected. So 55% of all the younger respondents found virtual meetings less productive, 50% in the US, 60% in the UK. And that was versus an average of 33% of 45 to 55-year-olds. So I guess the question that came out of that is, how do we help them get value from virtual meetings? Or do we need to insist that different groups need to spend more time in physical locations? So Colette, can I invite you to give us your thoughts on this one, please?
Yeah, you know, there's certainly more uncontrollable variables, right? When you're working in a Zoom meeting, whether that's showing your background, fear of disruptions, dog barking, you know, whole host of things that can happen, and that creates stress for individuals. And it'd be interesting to know how many individuals actually know how or receive training on how to conduct a virtual meeting, right? We shifted overnight almost to home-based working. And we did that with very little guidance, very little training, very little change management, or just protocols on how to be effective in this new working environment from home. And, you know, certainly there are times when we spend more time now on Zoom calls than I ever did, certainly in conference rooms. And I can't say that they're more productive. If the number of meetings has increased, then, you know, so too the likelihood of anxiety amongst our younger workers. So if you think about it from a business perspective, right? If you consider that approximately half or close to half of the workforce is below the 44-year threshold that you mentioned, this could potentially have an impact on a company's productivity and their success. So then you think about what companies can do, you know, in terms of just tailoring their workplace and their physical environments. I would say first is to recognize that, you know, really designing space for productivity is very different than designing space to accommodate headcount, which we've tended to do in the past, right? One person, one desk, versus now a whole host of different environments that enable the employee. And then you extrapolate that to the buildings now need to be reactive to employee or the occupant's needs, right? Whether that's changing of temperature, lighting, a whole host of things that smart building technology is bringing us. But you know, if you think about just virtual meetings, right, they can't substitute for the informal chats, right? We've all talked about the water cooler chatter and the value that brings. And I think offices are still going to be a place where there's going to be meetings for employees, clients, suppliers. It's a place of creativity, innovation, a place where employees can enhance and companies can maintain their culture, right? A place of learning. And potentially for some of us, it'll be a place that could be more productive than working from home. And so offices are going to have to blend, and David probably knows this better than anyone, just given his role at Cushman, but really blend of this virtual environment and the physical environment, right? Having teams that are going to be virtual interacting with teams that are going to be on site. And that's going to be a great opportunity for many companies on how they're going to do that and how they're going to enable that successfully. But one of the interesting, I would say, the data, or at least the survey data that you just shared, is the UK is higher amongst the younger population, but it's lower amongst 45 to 55-year-olds, right? So that's an interesting gap. And that gap actually grows wider for the 45 to 50-year-olds. I think it went from 40 to 25 for younger generations. And I think that is going to be interesting because these results could correlate to stress, right? And the concern, as you mentioned, is it presence over performance for career advancement? And likely one's future is really going to be based on EQ just as much as it is IQ, just given all of the information that's readily available at our fingertips. So it's going to be an exciting future, I think, for all generations.
Interesting, thank you. Nelly, David, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'd love to echo what Colette said, in the sense that there was no change management. We just had to learn how to do all of that we were doing in the office, not online. And for me, the fact that the numbers show that the younger generation is suffering more is obvious, because they are not the managers. They are the one affected by the management of an older senior population, and the numbers, surveys from Microsoft and McKinsey show that the younger generation were more vocal about the fact that their management was not able to really move toward asynchronous collaboration, toward less meetings and more documentation, whereas the younger generation was quick to understand, oh, I'm going to act differently on the digital HQ than how I was acting in the office. But unfortunately, my manager doesn't know how to handle a distributed team or a remote team. And so I'm suffering and I have a lot of stress. And also numbers from McKinsey show that most employees report that their manager feels very out of touch with their needs, the tools that they will need to really perform, the tools that they use to track their engagement or disengagement, and there's no right now red flags or tool that would identify when someone is feeling very disengaged. And also for this younger generation, they might have less time to really bond in person with people before going into the digital AQ. Maybe that was the first few years in the company compared to a more tenured population. And so all the numbers at the very beginning of COVID were showing that if you already had this in-person connection, it's very easy to continue having this water cooler conversation, even on Slack, because you created already that relationship. It's much harder when you just started, or if you had been onboarding during COVID, to just send a message and say, hi, I'm new, can we talk? Like, I know extroverts would do it, not everybody. And so unfortunately, that creates a disadvantage for the type of people in the company and how they really leverage creating connection, bonding, learning, and getting knowledge. Because as we talked about, like, knowledge comes from conversation with other people, but you have to create those conversations when you're not in the office. And so there's a disparate, like what younger people can do and their fluency with the tools, and maybe they're confronting with the management who is not maybe as fluent with the technology, and so they're having to like suffer from that type of management. Where again, I'm very optimistic is that most forward-thinking companies who are going hybrid, they all having their managers going through a training on asynchronous collaboration, on documentation, on etiquette. How do we conduct each other? What is our team policy? How do we make sure we're very inclusive of different time zone? And this is great because managers are going to be really, right now they were the gatekeepers to really unlock this hybrid model. And hopefully we can help them get there so they really become more, we're talking about servant leadership, but like better serving their team so they can perform successfully.
Great, thank you.
I just want to pick up on two words. So I heard EQ and I heard etiquette. And I think what we just went through was fantastic because we have evolved greatly. Because there was a time when people were scared to go on video, right? Or the bandwidth didn't support it. So we didn't have that capability, but now we've learned, and there's an etiquette to being on video or not being on video and what messages that sends. And, you know, and we've formed our own etiquette. So that's fantastic. And I happen to love the fact that everyone can be seen and heard and they can't hide. Unless they choose to. And if they choose to, they're sending a message. So it's created this interesting dynamic that's fascinating. So that's a plus. I think we've come really far. The disadvantage of this is that in order for that to happen, you pretty much have to put a meeting on your calendar, which is just now we're meeting more and having to be more intentional. And there's less of that ad hoc nature of work. So that's all fantastic. But now when we've got a problem on our hands is when we now open up the office and we have some people that are co-located and others that are not. One very basic problem is when you do set up a meeting and you don't have the ability to accept that meeting as being remote or in person. So you don't know whether you need a room for 12 people or, you know, for one person, right? So we'll solve that, and Cloudbooking will solve that for us, I'm sure. But then also, once you're in that meeting and you have some people that have the advantage of being co-located and seeing and witnessing someone's, and for those that have EQ, witnessing people's reactions and stuff, there's that the haves and the have-nots based on the people that are remote. So again, I think technology can solve this. I don't think this can be solved by Cloudbooking, but it's solved by the Microsofts and the Googles of the world, the video conferencing providers that can maybe provide more, create that hybrid meeting closeness so everyone can be seen and heard. I think that's a critical thing going forward that that's where we should put our focus and make sure that that use case is solved.
Yeah, I think I want to add again something that is beautiful. Definitely technology needs to catch up with what we need. But also we've seen that architects and furniture dealers and interior designers are putting their hands into it, because also the way that our conference room were designed, it's like we're all looking at just one spot, but then we're turning our head to talk to like our neighbor. And so someone on video wouldn't pick that. So there we've seen like a video about the new Google offices where their conference rooms are actually rounded, and there's multiple screens where you have the remote people. They even put like a fake fire in the middle to make it look like a campfire. But really this idea that like we also need to redesign spaces around us. And what you mentioned, like the etiquette, like how we also gonna have to learn how to like stop the chit chat in meeting rooms that the mic doesn't pick, because otherwise, again, we're preventing remote people from having this information that we're exchanging with someone else. So really, there's gonna be a behavioral change, a spatial change, and a technology catch up.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing for me, I actually I love technology problems. You know, I love to try and solve them. And early on in this thing, I got sick to death of trying my best to maintain eye contact with people like this by staring at a green dot, you know, at the top of my Mac, because it's the only way you can actually feel like you're looking someone in the eye. But of course, you're not. You know, the only way I can actually look at you and watch your responses and your body language is to look at the screen. So I even went down the line, much to the amusement of my family and colleagues, of working on some kind of Victorian refraction method. You know, because it's either that or a dead pixel in the middle of the screen, right? And I think but the one thing I did do is I asked everybody to switch their cameras on, you know, and then the other challenge I think is that it's when are you not at work? Right? If all you do all day long is have these meetings on Teams and Zoom and what have you, you know. So what we did is we put in place a whole bunch of what we call well-being programs. You know, we gave everybody an amount of money to spend on whatever they wanted to make them feel happier. You know, stuff like that. And we had like a coffee morning like most people do, but we also put in stretching sessions with physios where they could show people how to stretch from their desk, you know, from their chair, and a keep fit session from your desk. It was things like that actually ended up bringing people together and having a lot of fun. We use an application now for healthcare purposes that everybody kind of competes against each other on this rolling 30-day period, where you've got to try and get the most steps. So like there's some exhausted dogs across Cloudbooking, I can tell you. And that's made it a lot of fun, and it's actually brought everybody real close. So I think for me, I think the upshot of this, whatever happens, is that actually I think as colleagues, we'll probably end up socializing more, because we'll make more effort to get together. But the thing I miss the most is the actual eye contact, the visual interaction with other people. That's the thing I found the hardest, because I'm a real people person, and I kind of like that. So I think it's difficult.
Yeah, and again, there's so much I want to share, but like this is why also I think hybrid for me is actually the best of both worlds, because people are not gonna stay at home. They're gonna want to meet, and so if you don't offer an office space, they're gonna meet at the coffee shop, at the co-working space, which is great. But you also have this opportunity to really control the environment. So what as they meet, they also are like surrounded by the company's mission, the company's figures, they hear about other products. So like really it's an opportunity for companies to really continue creating the in-person collaboration or in-person meetings, because otherwise they're gonna happen. Like people are gonna find ways to meet anywhere. So for me, hybrid can really offer the best of both worlds.
That's really interesting, Nelly, because that actually brings me beautifully onto my next topic, the next area of our research, which was actually about the use of public spaces. So cafes, restaurants, pubs here in the UK. It became a bit of a thing. I started to see it emerging on social media about people booking desks in the local pub, and the pubs then trying to respond to that. It's something we're really keen to try and support and help. So we asked people about how they felt about the use of public spaces, and were they an option? And it was interesting, and probably not that big a surprise actually, that around 60% of all under 24-year-old people want to use public spaces for work, either always, sometimes, or more often. So we actually spoke to a few of our customers about that, and some of them actually started to formulate policies around it. And I think the interesting thing is how do we enable it to happen in a safe and productive way, or do employers want it to happen at all? So I think that's the big question. So David, can I invite you to give us your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, so I think two keywords I pulled out from your survey were approved and employer enabled, right? So it brings up that very topic of a policy, right? So every company has an expense policy that they enforce in different ways, right? And I think ultimately they're looking at a remote work kind of policy that they're going to have to form and figuring out how they enact that and enforce it. And interestingly enough, I think it's going to be combined with that kind of, the travel and expense policy. Is one thing we haven't heard much about in the surveys or anything is how quickly is business travel going to return, right? Because the numbers on your survey also, I noticed that half of the people that received the survey looked like they were essential workers and continued to work in the office the whole time. So that's one group of people. There's a whole other group of people, which are maybe sales and consultants that are used to traveling and going to visit other people's buildings and stuff, which would, play into kind of the using public spaces and everything. And then the other one is up in the air, right? We really don't know how that's going to form. So I think last I checked, there's not a 1,000-way tie for the best company to work in the world, and I think companies are going to have an opinion and they're going to create these policies to different degrees, because they're looking at different things. You still see people that have, covers on their screen so people can't see what's on their screen, and you have confidentiality and discussions, and it's different for every single company. So they're going to form up these policies that are going to be adhered to. Now, back to your survey, the intriguing thing is, yes, it's pretty consistent. Under 24-year-olds, 60%, want to work in public space. They're just out of the university and they just don't want to stop that, right? But what was intriguing, UK to the US, is between ages, I think 24 and 44, drastically higher in the UK, want to work in the coffee shop and everything.
Yeah.
and it's like a third in the US. So all I can read, and I'm speculating, but I read into that, and I think that has more to do, I think, with the car culture in the US than anything else, because I think, coffee shops, you can count the number of coffee shops that are drive-through in the US compared to other types of coffee shops. So I think there's something there. I think it's something to the fact that maybe most people in the UK can walk to a really compelling, have a choice between compelling spots, whether it's a bar or a coffee shop or anything right near home, and be a part of their local community, and not add to the carbon footprint and do all these other things. And I think if I had to speculate, I'd say that's probably at the core of why it is that young people don't want to be tethered. Well, I don't know, but I was interested. That was the biggest difference in your survey data that I saw. It was drastically different, like 60% in the UK, 24% for the US between those age groups. And there's something there. Yeah.
I think the French in me is looking at the etymology, because I got the chance to live in the UK and now to live in the US. I'm wondering if it's the word public that triggered the difference, because here, if we were talking about a WeWork, nobody would say it's a public space. Like we say it's a private. Everything is private in the US. Like even the coffee shop, it's private. It's owned by a company. So I'm wondering if there's like this play on word that would make the difference, because it's true. Like here, even in San Francisco, like what we call public spaces are like the few gardens that are maintained by the government. Everything else is private. So coffee shop, bars, co-working spaces.
Wow.
So that's what I don't know, as a French woman, I'm looking at the words and I'm like, oh, maybe that's the difference in culture and how we understand what is public, what is private.
Could be.
We've been talking about this kind of fourth place working environment, third place for over, a decade. So now we're talking about it now in the public context, which is interesting, because I think people want to work in areas and where they feel productive. And that may be in a variety of places, right? They may want to work in the office in the morning, and they may want to work in a public space in the afternoon, or home in the evening, since our days seem to be getting longer since we have such variety of work environments. But I think for corporate real estate executives and technology companies, it's really, how do you enable all of those different environments for employees to meet them at their needs versus, here's your space and you'll come in every day from 8 to 5. I think those days, we all agree, is long over. And now it's a question of how do we enable what employees want and that selection that they want. And if employers don't figure this out, it's going to be concerning for the retention of talent. I think I've seen, numerous surveys where individuals, they're willing to change employers based on this flexibility of having, the ability to work in the office or elsewhere, separate from the security issues that we've talked about for a long time. How do you secure your data on your laptop and all of those things? I think we're getting closer to that. And there are brighter minds than myself that are certainly figuring that out.
Mm.
I think it's also.
I don't know if you have seen the headlines yesterday that were very splashy, but it was showing that the majority of people would favor having flexibility over an additional 30K per year. This number was seems very surprising. But again, the fact is that companies don't have to figure it out. There's already the technology, the providers, there's beautiful startups, not even startups, they are unicorns now in the UK called Disana, Work Club. In the US, there's Upflex, and there's many more who are actually allowing employees to, from an app, book a spot at the office or at the co-working space or at the coffee shop, maybe Cloudbooking also. But so the technology is there, the providers are there. It's just on companies to just decide whether they're going to turn it on or turn it off. Again, it needs to come with a change management and etiquette, and how do we use all of different spaces for what purpose, and where is the intention? What are the things we would like you to do in the office? What are the things that you can do anywhere else? But yes, unfortunately, companies, in their decision of turning it on or off, they are seeing the impact. And like it was, I think another survey from Microsoft was showing that more than 40% of the workforce in the US is thinking about changing job in the next year or so.
Yeah,
that's big. That's a big turnover, and that's going to be a lot of processes and retraining and rehiring for companies. Whereas making a change and following where people are going would really make them, like, help them keep those employees.
So I think it's also a British thing. You know, I think maybe our angle is that our pubs are built for conversation, you know. And I come from Irish stock, so I do some of my best work in the pub. So maybe I'm probably better off staying out of it. But I think the interesting thing when we've spoken to clients about this is that the consensus seems to be that the other issue you've got to factor in when allowing employees to work from a third space for a long period is that space suitable for that employee? And I don't just mean in terms of, you know, they need the right kind of chair. That all needs to be assessed. But the topics that they're discussing potentially with customers, you know, and with colleagues, are they okay to be discussed in those kinds of environments? So I think maybe it's the Upflex model is interesting. You know, it's the horses for courses thing. One day a quiet space, another day a busy environment, depending on how you feel. I think it's a great idea. But it's interesting because the word I hear more than any other from clients is collaboration space, not desks and rooms, not offices, collaboration. We want people to come together in this building to collaborate, not just to come and work. And I think that's an interesting shift in the dynamic of the office environment for me anyway. And that's going to be a really interesting development.
Yeah. One impact report we did at Virtuns was looking at the difference pre-COVID and right now where we are on our way to be post-pandemic, hopefully. And already offices were not designed for this activity. Like only 30% of the floor plan was dedicated to collaboration, whereas it was like there was like 60% of people who were saying like, I'm only coming to the office to collaborate. So this is why we're also seeing changes made in the office and renovation and rebuilding and like changing the configuration to allow for that shift. Like people were already coming to the office to collaborate, and it was already common to us to work from home a day every week or a day every other week. So right now, what really the architects are talking about is like, how do we take activity-based working beyond the walls of the office? What are the activities that are best done at home in the third places, and what are the ones that we want to retain in the office? That's going to influence how we design, what are the policy, what is the etiquette, and what are the program that we're going to offer inside offices. Because I think the trend is that we're learning from WeWork, like how we build community comes with a program. So companies are going to start offering this program, and that will be accessible through apps. Like in the morning, employee will be able to wake up and see, oh, what is happening in the office today? Oh yeah, I don't want to miss that, so I'll come that day. Oh, tomorrow there's this, but actually I really want to have some focus time, so I'll go into the co-working space and reserve a space for myself. This is how people can really be empowered and plan their week ahead with less stress and more easiness because they have all the information handy to make their decision.
I think it's the companies that figure that out are going to be the ones that lead us out of this situation the most successfully, I would imagine. So it's an interesting segue into the next topic we covered, which was actually around well-being and stress. And we found that 29% of 18 to 24-year-olds and only 10% of those 55 plus were considerably more likely to feel stressed or anxious when working from home. It's an interesting thing. As I say, we do it all the time. So I found this particular topic of particular interest, actually. So why do we think this is, and how do we help reduce this stress and anxiety? So Nelly, what are your thoughts on that?
I think so. Again, I remember that something that shocked me from the survey was that where does this anxiety come from? And I read that anxiety was coming from this lack of transparency and communication. So every employee, no matter their age or age group, are feeling anxious of not knowing what what direction their company will take, because that influences the life decision that they would want to make. Do I stay in this apartment? Do I move? Can I take a bigger apartment in that city or in the suburb? Will I be able to work from home sometimes, or would I have to commute back every day? And unfortunately, that lack of information and transparency is bringing a lot of anxiety and is influencing their performance and productivity. So really, at Versions, as we work with companies, we advise them to keep companies informed. It doesn't mean that you have figured it out or you already know the direction, but like regular check-in, seeing where you are, what are the blockages that you're trying to overcome, what ideally or what is your intention behind the direction that you want to take, and continuing to survey employees to make sure you align with what they want is the best thing you can do.
Interesting, thank you. David, any thoughts on that one?
So I'm not sure. It's interesting because if you look at the commute and you look at the traffic that you have to sit in both ways, if you have to drive into major cities or if you have to get onto the tube, the amount of stress twice a day is just so incredible. So this is just a different type of stress. It's one that doesn't go away and remains for the whole time. And so as we return to the office and we start to see those things be added on top of it, I think the levels of stress are going to go way up before they go down, before they level out. But because it's just uncertainty. So like Nellie was saying, it's the uncertainty that you don't know about, so we're still dealing with a lot of stuff. We're still dealing with the safety factor. How do I get there? I want to go back to the office in Boston, and today is the first day the bus line opened up that I could go back. So I'm going to, see how today went and then maybe consider and test it out next week. But it's going to be a little dodgy, I think, for the first until things level out a bit. So it's going to be fascinating and just seeing how companies support and communicate through that challenge is going to be really important. And I think back to the early days within Cushman of the pandemic, the leadership was so fantastic. The outreach was great. We had visibility into leadership that we never had before and haven't had since, right? We saw webinars from our CEO and we talked to our CFO and we understood the dynamics that were going on, and it was fantastic.
Interesting.
So I'm hoping that at least there's another blip of that in the next few months to get us over that hurdle, to get us through that process.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. And I think actually that also leads us on quite nicely to the next topic, which we touched on earlier on in this discussion, which is around culture and staying connected, keeping people engaged. And more than half the respondents said they felt less connected to their company and their office and their colleagues when working from home. So I think the question is, how do we manage this without insisting that people come to the office? It's that kind of balance of what the new world of work looks like. It's an interesting one. So Colette, give us your thoughts on that one, please.
Sure. I think culture is based on shared values, right? And goals, and it includes the work practices. But it also impacts the attitudes of all the employees. For example, you may have a culture of teaming or a clan culture, and was harder to stay connected when we were moving to a home-based working, right? And re-entry may impact employees and their concerns around safety behavior of others, right? We've all seen the surveys that, I want to go back to the office, but I'm a little concerned about how everyone's going to follow the safety protocols. Mm-hmm. And that lack of trust impacts culture. But I also think for many companies, there might be a need to go through a healing process, right? Given all the layoffs, all the furloughs, those were tough on employees. They lost their peers. And so when they're coming back, it may be a very different environment with different people on their teams while they've seen them virtually, but there's an opportunity to really kind of rebuild the culture. And I think that, many times talent retention, and we talked about this earlier, depends on a sense of belonging rather than just only compensation. And it's like saying people leave companies and they leave their managers, right? But they stay for their peers and friends. And it's important for companies to understand that and really create a sense of belonging that kind of provides this longer term relationship and career development for individuals. And this is going to be an important area for real estate and how they support creating these spaces and supporting the employees in building those long-term relationships, right? Companies can invest in space to make employees feel valued and recognized, and they can create space that supports these communities and these, areas of mutual interest. And I think it's going to be pretty exciting. And I also think just touching upon the last topic, if you think about health and wellness, some people are now looking, certainly myself, I could get more health and wellness in the office. I understand, potentially the air quality, understand they're cleaning the offices, and a lot more of that information is transparent based on technology providing us with that information. Health and wellness programs, some have doctors on site. They have, as you said, in your organization, you're doing activities, whether that's yoga or other activities on site, but it really almost becomes that place of wellness over time. So I think even though we're going through this re-entry, I think the future is going to continue to change. And I think it's going to be a very different environment, a decade from now, on what companies are going to be providing employees in terms of the work environment and which ones are going to be those employers of choice.
Excellent. Thank you. Guys.
I think it's going to be fascinating because I think it's really hard to force culture, but it's really easy to kill it, right? And at the same time, you've got, the potential savings for reducing your portfolio footprint and what goes along with that. I don't have any answers. You've heard a lot of speculation, but I think it's fascinating. I think there's going to be those companies that really care about culture and are going to figure it out iteratively. And those that find out that they should have cared more about culture. It's going to be fascinating how it all plays out.
I think that's true, and I think that a lot of companies are looking at the cost reductions and the savings they can make, and perhaps not considering what costs they come at to culture and to workforce. We hear a lot in the UK here of very large organisations closing their offices and advising their staff that they now must work from home. And I can imagine a lot of those staff, like the younger ones, thinking, that may well be what you're advising me to do. I'm advising myself to look in the job section of the newspaper and get myself another job, frankly. So I guess we'll see how that plays out. So our final topic, our final question was around the post-pandemic office and what comes next. So 50% of our respondents said that they would like a mix of home, office, and other public spaces going forward. So what was interesting, it was interesting that more people, considerably more people in the UK, 68% of them want this than in the US. And in the US, it was 48%. So an interesting question as to why we think this is. We'd like to explore that in a moment. Only 21% in the UK, and actually only 31% in the US want a full return to the office. So is that what we expected? David, what are your thoughts on that one?
So if I just go back and take the liberty of just providing a little context about the digitization of stuff and give context to this, is it's not an either or, right? The pendulum spends most of the time in the middle, and that's what we see in these numbers. They might move a little bit more or not. But when we digitized documents, it was all about saving a tree, right? Yeah. And but we still sell printer cartridges and buy reams of paper, right? We probably will for a very long time. So it's nothing ever goes away. But having said that, the younger people don't even know what a checkbook is or how to order one or how to use one, sure, right? So things change for the better, right? And then on the heels of that, you have the digitization of books, right? So, and that again was all about saving a tree and all that type of stuff. But still, you can buy hardcovers, you can buy paperbacks, and you can buy Kindle versions, or you can search the internet for a free version if you really look hard. Then you have the digitization of fuel. And this is the first time we heard the word hybrid really thrown out there, the hybrid car, right? So it partially burned gas and partially electric. The trouble with that one was you had to spend a lot of money to save money, right? So it was really exclusive, and that's why the adoption levels, if you look at the percentages, are still quite low, even though we're getting there. What the digitization of the workplace is extremely unique because it's gonna save a lot of money, right? You don't have to convince anyone. There's a potential, and that's the way they're looking at this, is you can reduce your footprint by reducing the size of your office, and you're gonna end up with a pile of cash. And that's the real potential. But people don't know what they're gonna do with that yet, right? And this gets back to how important culture is and everything. So if we put that in context, is that there's opportunity here, and there's learning that we're unprecedented times. People are really going to figure out what's important to their company. But in terms of tailoring the workplace, I think there's a lot of people thinking about how you change the program of the office, make it more collaborative, change the design so the conference rooms are more less center focused and more maybe surround sound. But I equate it. I think people are in for a challenge. And if you've ever tried to balance a ceiling fan, right, and to get it right, it's a very iterative process and it's really hard. And if you take that analogy and add on top of it, is the way you're going to balance a ceiling fan is by chopping off little bits of the fan blade. If you're not careful, you'll balance the fan, but you're going to have no blades left.
Yeah, interesting. That's a really good analogy.
I think the people that it's an iterative process, and it's really a matter of how much fan is left for companies, and it's going to be a challenge. I actually think it's, you're going to have companies that decide to go back and have a space for everybody because it's far easier than if they start cutting those blades and find out that there's no fan left. So it's going to be a challenge. So I happen to think that the challenge is having the systems in place to be able to balance that blade. It's less about the program. It's less about the furnishings. It's less about all that stuff. It's having the systems in place to understand change as it happens, right? And to figure out how things are evolving, right? So that you can properly balance them. And then just in terms of the difference between the US and the UK, which is unique about this survey, which I love, I am, again, back to the commuting, I'm super scared of seeing the commutes in the US go back to where they were, where it's a 2-hour commute each way on the highways, because that's just so bad for the environment, right? Yeah. It happens to be super safe because everyone's socially distanced, right? But it's super sad that that would go. So it'll be interesting to see what companies, if they have an opinion about that, and if they have a say in how quickly that comes back. Equally, I would love to see ridership on the tube get back to its pre-pandemic levels, because public transportation, it's part of the lifeblood of London. I love London. I love it. But I also cringe at the thought of people, during rush hour, you don't even have to hold on to anything because there's no way you're going to fall down in the tube.
Very true.
It's because they're so packed in there. So, but that kind of, there's currently a creepiness there, is that's a little too close. So I don't know what's right, but I think it's interesting. We're going to see how companies really, whether they feel like they can have an impact on those bigger discussions in the way they react to this. And it's back to the whole notion of what they do with that pile of money should they decide to shrink their footprint. And if they put it all into earnings, oh, that's going to be a mistake, right? And where do they allocate that? So,
okay, Nellie?
I do think this is an enormous opportunity for technology to help solve, right? So as David suggested, it's not just about booking a space, but it's really understanding how the space is being used. And you have so many different variables, right? You have how many contractors are going to come in today, how many employees are going to come in, and that varies so much. And all the different variables around, whether people are going to commute, and all of those things are are really going to predict the amount of space and the type of space that companies need, and the technology that helps solve for that and those kind of predictive uses. We're going to need technology to solve for that, because I don't think the human mind yet can calculate those algorithms that quickly. So it's a bright future for technology in that sense, to work with companies to really help figure it out.
Interesting. Thank you.
I think I'd love to unpack a little bit of what David said, because it was really beautiful and it was packed also. But I don't know if you've read the book from Chris Kane, Where is My Office? But really what it says in the book is like everything is connected. And we didn't think everything was connected. We thought, oh, we can wait for sustainability, like workplace strategy, we can focus on workplace strategy and not talk about sustainability. Or now we can talk about culture and not talk about workplace design or sustainability or technology. And for they're all connected, because remote work somehow has saved our cities. Like the London tube and the New York subways, we're getting to a place where you had to wait 2, 3, 4 cars before you could get into that. Like we were getting to being overloaded in these CBDs. Yeah. And with remote work, we hope that we're gonna distribute wealth in the way that we were not doing before COVID. So distribute out of our economic centers and also distribute back into local communities where we were just like capturing the brands and moving them into the economic centers. So really this idea of hybrid world is also to be more distributed, distribute the wealth, distribute the load, distribute the commute, distribute the time of like the rush hours, and distribute them across the hour. And I also foresee that companies are going to have to invest a lot more money than they ever had before, because now they're going to have offices, they're going to have to trigger technology, they're going to have to trigger the third places and enable them. They're going to have to think about culture and have human behavior experts within companies, something that we didn't have before. And I'm like, how didn't we had that before? Like organizational change. So actually, like, our companies are ecosystems, and if we really want to nurture the innovation, the individuals who come through, and be sustainable in the way we use space and cars and fuel, we're gonna have to invest a lot more money, which is great, because we have all those bright minds who are up for the challenge, and hybrid is very much challenging, and it would be way easier to just say, oh, let's go back to how it was before. But our planet was not going in the right direction, and human beings were not going in the right direction. And there was already a lot of frustration on diversity and inclusion, on women empowerment, on fertility, etc. That's an opportunity for us to like put our minds at work and understand like what is the challenge in front of us, and how do we really find a way to overcome it in a way that is way better than the path we were taking before COVID.
Interesting. Thank you so much. I think it's for me anyway, it's a couple of things. I think you have to trust people, and you have to also accept and embrace the reality, believe it or not, that people care more about their families than they do about their jobs. And you have to put that at the center of everything you do. I'm a great believer in that. And I think you get the best out of people if you give them that slack and that room to be able to feel that freedom, to do the things that are really important. I remember somebody saying to me that after a couple of years working here, he felt that it had made him a better dad. And that was the proudest thing anybody ever said to me. And I think it's been a really fascinating conversation. I thank you all so much for your insight, for your thoughts. You guys are the thought leaders that are going to shape our way out of this pandemic. So more power to you. So we'll be sharing the results of the survey as part of the release of the webinar that we've had, the conversations that we've had today. And we'd really be grateful if any of you that are watching could give us your thoughts on the comments you've heard today, on the survey results that we share, and generally anything else you've got to add to this really fascinating topic. But for now, Colette, Nelly, and David, thank you so much. And thank you everybody else.
Thank you, Gerry.
Appreciate the invite.